"I never thought it would come to this," Franecha Torres muttered, standing in the courtroom, eyes wide with disbelief. As the weight of her crime began to sink in, her bravado melted away. The 17-year-old girl, who had lured a man to his death in a brutal robbery turned murder, was about to hear a sentence that would forever change the course of her life. The courtroom was silent, save for the quiet sobs from the victim's family. The once confident teenager, who had plotted a senseless crime, now stood frozen in fear. There would be no turning back. This was a moment of reckoning. The tragic case of Franecha Torres and her accomplices, Evans and Khalil Miller, shocked Gwinnett County, Georgia, and ignited a debate over youth crime, gang influence, and justice for minors. On October 7, 2018, a violent robbery took a tragic turn when 21-year-old William Tunchez was lured into a secluded area under false pretenses. What began as a planned robbery escalated into a brutal murder. The teenage trio, having promised Tunchez sexual services for $300, ambushed him and savagely beat him. The violence didn't stop there. As the group grew tired of the assault, one of them pulled out a weapon and struck Tunchez with it, ending his life on the spot. After the killing, the teens left him behind, abandoned like a discarded object. They fled with his belongings, convinced they had gotten away with their crime. But the law was closing in. This horrific act would lead to a manhunt, an intense investigation, and eventually, a courtroom battle that would unravel the lives of all involved. This was not just a case of a robbery gone wrong. This was a crime fueled by violence, gang influence, and a tragic misunderstanding of life's value. Before we dive deeper into the shocking details of this case, where are you watching from? I'd love to hear your thoughts and engage with you throughout the story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, because in this video, we'll explore not just the facts of this tragic crime, but the psychological, emotional, and legal consequences for everyone involved. Trust me, you won't want to miss the twists and revelations to come. In the next few minutes, we'll peel back the layers of this tragic story step by step. We'll begin with the shocking crime itself, the betrayal, the violence, the coldness of the act. Then, we'll move into the investigation, where every detail, every decision made, led to the shocking twists that followed. But the story doesn't end there. We'll take you into the courtroom, where the true cost of a single moment of rage was laid bare for all to see. This case reveals the stark truth about the human side of crime, the struggles, the mistakes, the brokenness, and the consequences that cannot be undone. Each piece of this story is more than just a headline. It's the unraveling of lives that will leave you asking, how could something like this happen? Could it have been prevented? Stay tuned, and let's explore the complexity of human behavior, youth crime, and the justice system together. The journey through Franecha Torres. The case is about to begin. Hold on tight as we break down the shocking events, the investigation, the trial, and the aftermath that left a community reeling, a family mourning, and 3 teens facing life in prison. Will you find the answers you're looking for, or will this case continue to haunt your thoughts long after it's over? Let's find out. Franecha Torres was a 17-year-old girl from Gwinnett County, Georgia, whose involvement in the murder of William Tunchez raises profound questions about the psychological and emotional drivers behind such a violent crime. While there is no public evidence of a formal history of mental illness, the case paints a picture of a troubled individual. Torres, along with her accomplices, exhibited a complete disregard for human life, luring Tunchez into a vulnerable position under false pretenses and then ruthlessly murdering him. This callousness may be attributed to several factors. Adolescents, particularly those involved in gang culture or violent subcultures, often struggle with impulsivity, poor decision-making, and emotional regulation. Torres and her co-defendants had connections to the Quacked Gangster Disciples, a street gang with a history of violence, which might have influenced their actions. The normalization of violence in their environment could have desensitized them to the gravity of their actions. Additionally, teenagers, even without a diagnosed mental illness, are still developing their emotional and psychological maturity, which may explain the lack of empathy Torres demonstrated during the trial and in the moments leading up to the murder. Torres likely felt invincible or detached from the consequences of her actions, a common mindset among individuals involved in high-risk behaviors. The thrill of power, the desire for financial gain, and the influence of her peers may have overshadowed any moral compass she once had. Her belief that she could escape serious consequences due to her age is indicative of a lack of understanding about the gravity of the situation and her role in it. Her calm demeanor in court, even as the murder charges mounted, suggests an individual who had become numb to the consequences of her actions. However, it's important to note that while Torres' actions were violent and extreme, they were not necessarily driven by mental illness. Rather, they may have stemmed from a combination of environmental factors, peer pressure, and a profound misunderstanding of the value of human life. William Tunchez, the victim in this case, was a 21-year-old man whose life was tragically cut short by the actions of 3 teenagers. Before his death, Tunchez had dreams and aspirations like many others his age. He was a young man just beginning his adult life, full of potential. Although details of his personal life are sparse, his tragic death paints a picture of a life violently and unnecessarily interrupted. Tunchez's family was left shattered by the crime. His mother, father, and siblings were left to mourn a loved one whose life was taken in an unfathomable manner. Losing a child to such a brutal act is an indescribable pain that stays with a family forever. The fact that Tunchez was not only murdered but also robbed and discarded like an object makes his loss even more painful for his family. No parent should have to bury their child, let alone in such a violent, senseless way. The emotional toll on the family was evident during the trial. As the details of Tunchez's death came to light, his family's anguish became palpable. They were forced to relive the horrific moment of their loved one's murder, watching as his killers remained largely indifferent. The trial, which included the teens' cold-hearted behavior and their apparent lack of remorse, further deepened the emotional wounds inflicted by the crime. Tunchez's friends and family had to reconcile the vibrant life he lived with the grisly way it was taken from them. His absence left an undeniable hole in the lives of those who knew him, and the pain of his death has rippled throughout the community. His death sparked conversations about youth violence, the consequences of gang involvement, and the need for stronger community support systems to prevent similar tragedies. The emotional scars left by his death will likely affect his loved ones for the rest of their lives. The crime had a lasting impact beyond just the family. The entire community was shaken by the brutal nature of the act. Gwinnett County, known for its suburban tranquility, was forced to confront a reality where such heinous acts could happen close to home. The crime served as a stark reminder that violence can touch any corner of society, especially when young people are caught in the grip of destructive influences. In the end, the story of William Tunchez and Franecha Torres is a tragic reminder of how easily lives can be destroyed in moments of violence, and how deep the emotional scars can go for both victims and perpetrators. While Torres will face the consequences of her actions, Tunchez's family will live with the heartbreaking loss of a son, a brother, and a friend, forever haunted by the brutal way he was taken from them. The sound of a phone ringing echoed through the still night air, cutting through the silence of Bonn. October 7, 2018, in Gwinnett County, Georgia. It was the moment William Tunchez realized he had made a fatal mistake. He had been lured under false pretenses, promised a sexual encounter for $300, and directed to a secluded spot. As he pulled into the darkened area, his headlights illuminated 3 figures waiting in the shadows: Franecha Torres, Nicholas Evans, and Khalil Miller. At first it seemed like a simple transaction, but it would quickly escalate into a nightmare. Without warning, they rushed toward him. There was no negotiation, no further words. They didn't need to say anything. Evans, who was holding a weapon, lunged at Tunchez. The moment he raised it, the violence erupted. First, a strike to the back, then more as they pushed him to the ground. He tried to fight back, his hands trembling with fear. But it was too late. The group descended upon him with brutal force. Torres, who had arranged the meeting, watched with cold indifference. The adrenaline in the air was palpable. Everything moved too fast. Evans hit Tunchez again and again, each blow more intense than the last. Miller, not far behind, grabbed Tunchez's belongings, his phone, his wallet, items that would not satisfy the hunger of these attackers. They wanted more. They needed to prove something, or perhaps nothing at all. Tunchez was pinned beneath the assault, the ground rough against his skin as he struggled to stay conscious. His mind raced, probably hoping this was some twisted prank. But the truth was clearer by the second. He wasn't going to make it out. It was then that Miller, as if on cue, produced a weapon. A sharp final blow came from behind, a strike to his head that ended the struggle. Tunchez's body went limp in an instant. There was no hesitation, no mercy. They stood over him for a moment, staring at the life they had just taken. The act of violence seemed almost routine to them, the coldness in their eyes unmistakable. What followed was a disturbing indifference. They left Tunchez's body behind, abandoned in the cold, now just another victim discarded like trash. His phone, wallet, and any trace of the humanity he had left were taken, leaving no sign of who he was. Just another casualty of reckless violence. The group walked away into the night, not with the satisfaction of a clean crime, but the empty feeling of an act they would struggle to escape for the rest of their lives. This was no longer about the money. It was about something far darker, something inside them that could never be undone. The police arrived soon after, alerted by a witness who had seen the group near the scene. But by then, it was too late. Tunchez's final moments were lost to the brutality of three teens who thought themselves invincible, unaware that their crime would forever alter the lives of those left behind. The twisted finality of that night had begun. The investigation into the brutal murder of William Tunchez began immediately after the discovery of his body behind a house in Gwinnett County. Initially, there were few leads, but law enforcement quickly set to work piecing together the details. A key witness had seen a group of teenagers near the crime scene on the night of the murder, and this sighting became the first significant lead. The witness described the group as acting suspiciously, which prompted detectives to turn their focus to a local gang. The Gangster Disciples, who were rumored to be active in the area. Within days, investigators discovered that the victim's phone had been stolen and traced it to a series of calls made from a nearby location. This breakthrough led them to Nicholas Evans and Khalil Miller. They were initially hesitant to speak with the police, but under interrogation, they cracked, revealing Franecha Torres as the third participant in the crime. Torres had arranged the meeting with Tunchez, leading to the violent robbery that spiraled out of control. The teens' statements and the evidence collected from their phones, photos of stolen goods and messages about the crime, painted a damning picture. Despite the confessions from Evans and Miller, Torres remained silent at first, showing no remorse. But the investigation was far from over. Evidence of the group's gang affiliation raised questions about the motivations behind the murder, but authorities were clear. Their actions were fueled by an intention to rob and kill, not a deeper gang conflict. The teens were arrested and their trial began a few months later, attracting local media attention due to the shock of the crime, the involvement of minors, and the brutality displayed. The courtroom drama that followed was intense, with the prosecution painting a chilling picture of the events leading to William Tunchez's death. The turning point in the trial came when Franecha Torres, who had initially remained stoic and detached, finally showed signs of fear. As she realized the full extent of the charges, felony murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit murder, the gravity of the situation became impossible to ignore. The courtroom was filled with tension as Torres struggled to maintain her composure. The prosecution's case was built on the damning evidence, witness testimonies, digital forensics, and the confessions of Evans and Miller. They argued that Torres had been the mastermind behind the plan, having lured Tunchez into a trap with the promise of sex in exchange for money, only to see the situation spiral into violence. The brutality of the murder was emphasized during the trial, with emotional testimonies from Tunchez's family, who described the anguish of losing their son in such a senseless way. Torres, on the other hand, showed little to no remorse during the proceedings. At one point, she even smirked during the presentation of evidence, an action that deeply upset the victim's family and further painted her as indifferent to the crime. Khalil Miller and Nicholas Evans, though both showing some regret, were also held accountable, with their confessions playing a crucial role in securing the convictions. One of the most controversial elements of the trial was the sentencing of Torres, who, despite being a minor, faced a life sentence without parole. The defense attempted to argue that she should be treated more leniently due to her age, but the prosecution countered, stating that her actions showed a level of premeditation that warranted the harshest punishment. Torres's defense team also tried to paint her as a victim of her environment, influenced by gang activity and peer pressure. However, this argument failed to sway the jury, who found her guilty on all counts. In the end, the jury deliberated for several days before delivering the verdict. Guilty Maidan on charges of felony murder and armed robbery. Torres, Evans, and Miller were each sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge's words were final and unyielding, reflecting the gravity of their actions. As the gavel fell, Torres's face, once filled with defiance, now displayed the realization that her life would never be the same. She was led away, the courtroom filled with the quiet sobs of Tunchez's family, who could only hope that justice had been served. Despite the sentence, the damage was already done. William Tunchez's life could never be returned, and the consequences of this brutal act would ripple out for years to come. The trial closed a chapter on a senseless tragedy, but it left the larger questions unanswered. What drives a teenager to commit such a violent act? And could this tragedy have been prevented? The answers remain as elusive as ever. The aftermath of William Tunchez's tragic death sent shockwaves throughout Gwinnett County, forever altering the community's perception of youth violence. The crime, particularly the involvement of minors in such a brutal act, left residents grappling with the unsettling reality that even in suburban areas, violent crime could occur without warning. The incident forced local leaders to address the growing issue of gang activity among young people, with many questioning the effectiveness of existing programs aimed at curbing such violence. The community, once seemingly untouched by such acts, now found itself searching for ways to prevent future tragedies. 4. Tunchez's family. The pain of losing a son, brother, and friend in such a senseless manner was immeasurable. His mother, father, and siblings were left to mourn the life that was taken too soon, their grief compounded by the brutal nature of his death. As they navigated the trial and its emotional toll, they were forced to relive the traumatic event again and again. The loss left a permanent scar, and while the legal system delivered justice, no sentence could bring back the loved one they had lost. The perpetrators, Franecha Torres, Nicholas Evans, and Khalil Miller, faced the ultimate consequence for their actions. All three were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected the severity of the crime. For Torres, in particular, the sentencing was a harsh wake-up call. Once a teenager with a future ahead of her, she now faces a lifetime behind bars. Her case sparked debates about juvenile justice, with some arguing that her age and lack of a criminal history should have resulted in a lesser sentence, while others believed that the brutality of the crime warranted such a harsh punishment. The lasting societal effect of this case is a heightened awareness of the dangers posed by gang influence on youth and the potential for violence to erupt even in the most seemingly innocent of situations. The case of Franecha Torres and her co-defendants, Nicholas Evans and Khalil Miller, represents a harrowing tragedy that has left an indelible mark on the lives of all involved, the victim, his family, and the community at large. It serves as a stark reminder of how fragile human life is and how quickly it can be shattered by the actions of individuals who have lost their way. At the heart of this tragedy is the question of how a group of teenagers could commit such a brutal act. While the perpetrators have been held accountable, the root causes of their behavior remain complex and multifaceted. Gang influence, peer pressure, and a lack of empathy seem to have played significant roles in pushing them to commit an act of violence so extreme. The emotional and psychological detachment displayed by Torres, Evans, and Miller during the trial points to a troubling disconnect between their actions and an understanding of the consequences. These were not isolated individuals, but rather products of a broader social environment that failed to provide the support and guidance they needed during their formative years. The aftermath of the crime has left William Tunchez's family devastated. Their son, brother, and friend was taken from them in a senseless act of violence, leaving them to grieve a loss that could never be replaced. No conviction, no sentence could bring him back. For them, the pain of that night will never fully heal. At the same time, the perpetrators face a future of incarceration, forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. The case also highlights the flaws in our societal systems, where youth are often neglected, and the path to violent crime is not addressed until it is too late. This story, though tragic, offers us an opportunity to reflect on the broader societal issues that allowed such a senseless act to unfold. Mental illness, neglect, and violence are often cited as contributing factors in these kinds of cases. But perhaps the most significant takeaway is the societal failure to intervene in time to prevent such a tragedy. The question we must ask ourselves is, how can we, as a society, do better? How can we provide the necessary support systems for young people who are at risk of falling into a life of crime? And most importantly, could these tragedies have been prevented? When we reflect on the cases involving Franecha Torres, Nicholas Evans, and Khalil Miller, we are confronted with painful truths about the vulnerability of youth and the potential for violence to emerge from environments of neglect, peer pressure, and gang influence. These were not just the actions of 3 individuals. They were the result of systemic failures that allowed these teens to slip through the cracks. Mental illness, though not explicitly identified in the case, might be a factor in understanding the perpetrator's emotional detachment from the brutal reality of their actions. How can young individuals commit such extreme violence without the empathy or understanding of its consequences? Did they grow up in environments where violence was normalized, or were there deeper psychological issues at play? Neglect is another factor that looms large in cases like this. Did these teens have access to the guidance and support they needed to navigate their tumultuous teenage years? Or were they abandoned to figure things out on their own, drifting toward dangerous influences and destructive paths? Lastly, violence. Both as an immediate cause of this crime and a larger societal issue, deserves deep consideration. This crime was not a spontaneous act but a violent escalation that unfolded over a period of time. It challenges us to think about how we, as a society, condone or fail to address the violence that surrounds us, whether it is in the form of gang activity, media portrayal, or a culture that normalizes aggression and harm. Could these tragedies have been prevented? It's a question that stirs emotions, urging us to look inward. What does this case say about our responsibility as a society to protect our youth and prevent the cycle of violence? How can we provide the necessary tools, education, and support to steer young people away from these destructive paths? The answer is complex, but one thing is clear. Prevention starts with intervention, early, consistent, and compassionate intervention. These cases remind us that each individual involved, whether as a victim or perpetrator, is part of a larger social fabric, and the consequences of neglect, violence, and systemic failure touch everyone. The responsibility lies with all of us to change the systems that allow such tragedies to unfold, to protect our youth, and to ensure that such senseless loss becomes a rare occurrence, not a regular one. What do you think? Was justice truly served in the case of Franecha Torres and her co-defendants? Do you believe their life sentences were justified, or should they have received a second chance? Could this tragedy have been prevented? And what role does society play in preventing such violence among youth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this complex case. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth true crime explorations. Like and share this video to continue the conversation with others, and stay tuned for more stories that examine the darker side of human behavior and justice.